For me, Blade Runner 2049 is not only one of the best films of 2017, it's also one of my favorite films of all time. Denis Villeneuve took the best elements of Ridley Scott's 1982 original and expanded upon them to make an even more dynamic story. The film is an incredibly cerebral experience. Rather than just playing it safe and making some fast-paced, action-packed film that cheaply grabs the attention of the audience, the film has a running time of over 2 hours, which hypnotically takes the viewer on a rich journey through the world Villeneuve creates. Roger Deakins' cinematography is phenomenal, winning an Academy Award for its spectacular yet gritty portrayal of LA in 2049, and the score instills within the audience a feeling of wondrous foreboding as we get to watch Kay, the film's protagonist, struggle with the perennial question of what it means to be human. In Blade Runner 2049, there are strong female characters, such as Robin Wright's Lieutenant Joshi, who's Kay's superior within the LAPD, Love, a fierce replicant enforcer for the Wallace Corporation, and Dr. Anna Stelline, who possessed a quiet strength that for me made her one of the most compelling characters in the film. But despite these strong female characters, the film received a ton of backlash for its portrayal of women. And despite my deep love for the film, I have to agree with its backlash to a certain extent. It was the wide-eyed, subservient, and often nude character of Joy, portrayed by Ana de Armas, that left me feeling kind of uneasy as I left the theater. Now, I know lovers of the film will argue that Joy is a product of the Wallace Corporation, who's designed specifically to be purchased by men, and through this, Villeneuve is showing us how women will be exploited in this future society. But I want to argue in this video that Villeneuve's commentary does not even scratch the surface of how this kind of exploitation affects women, and as a consequence, he only ends up perpetuating this exploitation by objectifying female bodies on a mass medium. Yes, you could argue that Blade Runner 2049 empowers women through its female characters, and that not all female characters have to be strong, independent women, but it's my personal belief that fulfilling a quota of strong female characters doesn't mean your film is immune to portraying women in a harmful light. Villeneuve's responded to this backlash by stating, "I'm very sensitive to how I portray women in movies. This is my 9th feature film and 6 of them have women in the lead role. The first Blade Runner was quite rough on the women, something about the film noir aesthetic, but I tried to bring depth to all the characters. For Joy, the holographic character, you see how she evolves. It's interesting, I think." So, it's clear that he wanted to portray women as whole characters in response to the original film. But while characters like Joy may have some sort of arc, she's still presented as a commodity to the viewer. Yes, Joy is an actual commodity, a product of the Wallace Corporation whose entire existence is to provide company, comfort, and affirmation to her clients. But as Kay navigates the downtown area and enormous holographic advertisements of Joy saunter the streets completely naked, are male audiences being asked to revile this dangerous commodity that encourages men to replace real-life women with a sexualized hologram? Or are they being asked to ogle a massive naked female body? The answer is unclear. For me, this kind of commentary about the objectification of women in a capitalist society is a difficult line to tread when the commentary itself belongs to a product of mass consumption, a blockbuster film. If Villeneuve sought to objectify women in this movie as a social commentary, he should have gone beyond just showing us that women can be objectified in this dystopian society, and actually explored how this kind of exploitation affects these female characters, or at least inquired deeper into this very complex problem. I want to explore what I find to be a gap between Villeneuve's message and the way his audience receives that message. In her essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, Laura Mulvey addresses the crux of this gap. She states, "Traditionally, the woman displayed in narrative films has functioned on 2 levels, as erotic object for the characters within the screen story, and as erotic object for the spectator within the auditorium, with a shifting tension between the looks on either side of the screen. So in Blade Runner, while Joy's function within the film is to be a romantic object for Kay, she also functions as an erotic object for the viewer, and this is the gap." Mulvey then goes on to state, "The split between spectacle and narrative supports the man's role as the active one of forwarding the story, making things happen. The man controls the film fantasy and emerges as the representative of power in a further sense, as the bearer of the look of the spectator, transferring it behind the screen to neutralize the extra diegetic tendencies represented by woman as spectacle. The male movie star's glamorous characteristics are thus not those of the erotic object of the gaze, but those of the more perfect, more complete, more powerful ideal ego. Ultimately, K is the protagonist of Blade Runner 2049. We as the viewers see his world through his eyes. We feel viscerally what he feels. We are devastated when he learns that he's not in fact the human replicant child of Deckard and Rachel, and when Joy's destroyed at the end of the film, we don't feel this tragedy from her perspective, but rather from the perspective of K. Empathy is an integral aspect of narrative cinema. However, the extent to which we empathize with Joy is centered on her struggle between her real human feelings for Kay and her inability to fully realize these feelings because she's a robot, and not so much in her status as a subordinate being within her society, a status as a slave to the men who purchase her. And it's because of this framing through the eyes of Kay that Villeneuve's message of female exploitation is unable to fully reach his audience and bridge the gap. And thus, it becomes pretty paradoxical when we watch a film that tries to represent how the relegation of women to being objects of consumption is bad, while we simultaneously consume the women in the film as objects. So how can we bridge this gap? How can we comment on the objectification and exploitation of women without objectifying women to demonstrate this problem? I don't necessarily have the answer, but I do know that it can't only be found in fulfilling a quota of strong female characters, nor can it be found in simply representing on screen the very societal ill that you're condemning without further investigating it. I think the answer lies in how you allow your viewers to empathize with the victims of this problem and see how it affects them from their perspective. So as I said at the beginning of this video, Blade Runner 2049 is one of my favorite films of all time. I just think it raises an important discussion about the very fine line between commenting on the exploitation of women in film, and then turning around and doing just that.